Martin Murray to begin with. He has 35 years experience in the UK nuclear industry, and now he works as an environmental regulator. He is a part of the Nuclear New Build Program Executive with the Environment Agency in England, where he works to ensure world-class environmental standards that are applied to design, construction, commissioning, operation and decommissioning of the new generation of nuclear power plants in the UK. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Aha, the microphone works. I feel as if I should be dancing. Can I just thank everyone, first of all, for the invitation from this conference. I'm actually here not as a member of the Environment Agency, but a member of something called the EURATOM Scientific and Technical Committee. And this is a committee that I would like to describe to you today and give you some more information. If I can magic the... There we go. So the EURATOM Scientific and Technical Committee is an advisory body, but it's a very hidden advisory body within the treaty, which is surprising because it's been around since the beginning. It's actually laid out in the Euratom Treaty, and it asks the committee to give opinions on matters which it thinks is fit, or which the Council of Ministers or the Commission or the officials ask us to look into. And I think that is a very powerful committee, but we tend to give our advice, I'd probably say, in camera rather than in public. So it's the only scientific and technical committee established under the treaty, and it's been active since 1957. So for over 60 years, and I have to say it's not been me that's been here for 60 years, because the committee operates on a 5-year term, and the members are nominated by the Council of Ministers to go on a technical basis to advise in a neutral way based on their technical experience and knowledge on matters which they believe the Commission, the Ministers and the officials should receive advice. So some of that is at the request of Christoph and others who will ask us to look at something, and we will. Some of that is linked to research priorities going forward, but some of it is generated directly by the committee itself. So the committee has a 5-year mandate, and what I want to talk about today in particular, let's go back, is our work in the 2013 to 2018 mandate. And we generate an opinion, and that opinion will be available for you within the papers associated with this conference. Sometimes the messages within that opinion can seem a little bit hidden, but I'll try and draw them out for you today. They're quite direct. One of the concerns of the committee is the need to continually emphasize the need for research and the rationale for that. Now, sometimes it's not always transparent. It was great today to have some ministers from the Romanian government, and both of those individuals had technical degrees and therefore understand science, technology, engineering, and all the things that go with that. However, in some political institutions, sometimes there's a gap between technical knowledge and the people who are driving that at the top. So the committee thinks it's part of its job to give some clear messages at every opportunity around the need to maintain research. So they're up there on the board, and if you can bear with me, I'll go through them individually. First of all, of course, we need to maintain capability. And I'll come back to this because we either need to be intelligent clients for Soviet reactor technology or Chinese reactor technology or American technology, or indeed, in the case of the UK, French technology from the EPR reactor. We won't necessarily be leaders But we need to decide what we're going to be, in which either of those two roles, we need to have research so that we've got people coming through the technical schools and the universities who understand the topics, who can then play that role either as leaders or as an intelligent client to receive technology and to operate plant to dispose of the waste in the long term. Now, nuclear safety, security crosses boundaries. So you may be in a member state which doesn't or does not want to have a nuclear power program in the future. However, if there is an accident in a member state or an adjoining country, there will be impacts on yourself and ourselves. So therefore, it's important for everyone to realise we need to have that capability independent of how your own member state is going to manage the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. And we heard a lot about that this morning. So I'm adjusting my talk as I go along based on everyone else's presentation to try and keep it very relevant but not to duplicate. The need for high standards of safety has already been explained by a number of speakers. The continuous need to improve standards of safety and to ratchet up those. That's embedded within the IAEA standards and the Basic Safety Standards Directive and the Nuclear Safety Directive. We've had a lot today about climate change and the challenge of 2050. At the moment, we've got an established program. We talk about small modular reactor technology, and for those of you who are looking at things like Alfred in the posters, that was saying deployment 2050. Well, if we're serious about low carbon generation, then we're probably talking about deployment of these technologies sooner rather than later. So perhaps there's something, do we have the right ambition for our research and investment over the next 20 or 30 years, or do we need to increase that? Because at the moment, we pay very little across Europe, both within the Commission, through the EURATOM programme, and also member states. So there's a question there that we need to consider. How serious is Europe about carbon neutral 2050? Do we really understand the implications, not just for nuclear, but for the grid and for a lot of other aspects? Safe decommissioning and disposal of current and future wastes. The committee operates by consensus. So it doesn't operate by majority. So therefore, one area of common ground is going to be decommissioning, because all the member states have that requirement. And we need to start to dispose of that waste to ensure that our future generations do not pick that up. And that's a sustainability and intergenerational equity point. And then the last thing I'll touch on is people forget that radioisotopes come from nuclear facilities, either accelerators in some cases, or indeed through research reactors like the Jules Horowitz, should that ever come into fruition. So it's all relative to us, and the research community is central to maintaining a flow of skills and capability to operate and engage with these facilities in the future. And we've already heard the, I think, surprising thing. We need 5 generations of skilled engineers to enable us to dispose of our waste. If you go back, where are we now, 2019? So if you go back to 1898, there was still a battle about canals versus the railways. So where will we be in 100 years' time? And how do we ensure that knowledge management? So, research priorities. None of these will come as a surprise. Fusion. We're still committed to fusion 40 years off. And the UK, I'd probably say, still committed to geological disposal 40 years off. How can we close that 40 years so we actually deliver it within the next 15, 20 years and show a real growth? Because if we're talking about carbon 2050, carbon neutral, we can't keep on saying 40 years. Fission. Fission's an interesting one because we always look towards the new shiny toys. And by that I mean fusion, I mean generation 4 reactors. But we've already heard that in order to maintain the contribution from nuclear, even if we don't increase it, we're looking at plant lifetime extension of generation 2 and generation 3 reactors. So fission research had probably got an increased priority if once again we come back to carbon-free 2050. Nuclear materials, as we continue to extend the lifetime of reactor systems, or indeed look to push towards fusion technology or novel SMRs and restart a lot of interest in fast breeder technology, the materials research has to be up there, because otherwise we will be generating a reactor from which we cannot take out the heat and we cannot decommission safely, and we haven't thought about the waste implications of the materials before we start operating the systems. But for me, the really important thing about today's research community, the work you're all doing, is those bottom three, which is to maintain the skills, to develop and maintain a future capability, and to enable leadership. The question, of course, is, does Europe lead across all reactor systems and all areas, or do we choose to specialize in some areas? So if you're from France, you may say we'll specialize in the fuel cycle because France is good in the fuel cycle, but that might not be the decision across Europe. So what's the future options? Climate change. It's come along quite rapidly in terms of the politics. I can't say that about the IPCC because I was interested in that 20 odd years ago. But at this moment in time, there's a lot of political interest on climate change and how we can stop not 1.5, not 2, not 3, but possibly a 4-degree rise in temperature. And for people that live in cities, you could be looking at a 6 or 8 degree increase in terms of your temperature within your cities. So this is all the backdrop to research priorities going forward. And we've already heard today that nuclear power appears as part of the roadmap to low carbon generation across the world. And that's mainly Asian in terms of drive. So we have a Soviet commitment to a significant increase in the nuclear generation fleet and sale of that technology. We see the Chinese knocking out reactors at a pace which is barely believable. They can throw up an HPR 1000 in 6 years. And just to give you an idea behind that, some colleagues visited a site and they said it would take them 6 years to throw up an HPR 1000, and explained that this was a part of China which didn't have a large population center. So they decided to build a town 8 kilometers that way through a mountain, but rather than drive a road over it, they've driven through it. So that's the, okay, centralized economy. And there might be things about the Chinese you may or may not agree with, but that shows the pace and commitment. And then they looked at us, I looked at my colleagues who said, 6.5 years? And they said, no, don't worry, we've already done the first 2 years' work. So from ground to having a reactor operating 4.5 years. So we're not quite there in Europe, but we perhaps need to think slightly faster than we do normally, and the infrastructure, skills and capability would need to drive that. Small modular reactors I've touched on. If you're going to decarbonize, then you need different heat sources. So there's a role for different types of reactor system. Within Europe, we're looking at a few. Are they the ones that will win? Don't know. But it's very useful that we keep that research open. But the question I've got is, are we going too slowly? Fusion, well, I'll just say lots of money goes into fusion. That's a political decision. There's lots of research around it, but there's lots of material science and other areas which stretch across our areas of interest as a research community, as scientists, and there may well be some transition across to some of the other nuclear work that we're doing at the moment. Do we maximise that at the moment? I'm not so sure. So looking forward, socio-economic, and I suppose, Christoph, this is where I have a slight, not disagreement, but I don't distinguish too much between technical research and socio-economic research. I think that if we're going to look at reactor systems, we need to look at it as a whole, because if we don't do the socio-economic bit, we won't be able to do the technical bit because society won't allow us to do it. So I think we definitely need to do a bit more around socio-economics. Safety and operation of nuclear reactors, technology, safety culture, and human factors. And it's the last one of those human factors. If I could see through these blinding lights, I'd ask, are there any human factors experts in this room? Zero. That's a big gap at the moment. We don't have enough human factors experts. We're the problem when it comes to systems. Quite often, ask Boeing at the moment, so it's like divergence there. So we're going to look forward, and as an STC, we're saying we need to do a bit more on socio-economic research. We need to continue to do work on safety and operation of nuclear reactors. If we had another accident in Europe or anywhere else in the world, it would knock this commitment to zero carbon down. We've got the fusion roadmap assessment. We completed one in the last STC, but we recognised, and I think a colleague said from Andra today, that as projects go on, the skill set and the structures and the organisation round delivery have to change and develop. And that's what's happening with the fusion at the moment. We're moving to another step as we're looking more towards construction, demo, and various other things. So the STC will be looking at that again in this new 5-year time period, I believe. I've got to say that because the STC still has to get together in about October and decide what its priorities are. And there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment. And then the last one, Joint Research Centre, direct and indirect actions. Well, I'd broaden it out a bit further than that and say member states, because at the end of the day, there is not a vast amount of money within the EURATOM budget. Christoph does a great job in grabbing money. We do a great job in getting money within the EURATOM budget. But we need to work together in partnership to deliver infrastructure and to deliver a really high quality research program which will generate the engineers and scientists of the future to support the nuclear industry across Europe. But don't forget, it's not all about nuclear power. And therefore, we're going to be having a focus around non-power generating uses of radioactivity in the coming 5-year term. So we're going to look at medical and industrial, and it's already been mentioned, more around the medical side of things. The last one for me is we can focus very much on EURATOM money and EURATOM budgets, but there are other areas where we could use research funds. And that's something we need to remember, the broader aspects of other research fields. There's money out there for medicine, but it doesn't bleed across to nuclear terribly well. Equally well, fusion program is doing things. Is there any cross-transference into the fission and other areas? So that was what I was wanting to say to you. It's a bit of a challenge, really, because as a research community, we can roll along with our little bit of funding. We can do some interesting research. Is this the time for a step change? Is this the need and the time linked to zero carbon, that Europe needs to move in a different direction? Do we need to have a higher commitment for resources from the Commission? Do we need to have more money from member states? And does it all need to link back to this 2050 zero carbon position? So it's a little bit of a challenge to everyone, I think. But it's the sort of messages that the Scientific and Technical Committee feeds in to the Commission and to the ministers. And we've been seeking to increase the visibility of those messages. And as I said, the STC opinion, which you won't be able to see, but you will have access to a PDF copy on the conference papers, sets out those legacy messages, perhaps in a slightly softer tone, but perhaps not if you knew who was saying it. So that's all I want to say just now. I'm looking at Roger, who was nodding at me. So I think I maybe have said enough for this moment in time. Thank you.